The lore of the 2008 Turok reboot begins with the sovereignty of the Black Ops betrayal. The story follows Joseph Turok, a former member of the elite Wolfpack Commando Squad. Turok is a man caught between two worlds, representing the lore of the indigenous warrior and the sovereignty of the modern soldier. The game opens as Turok is sent to a remote, uncharted planet to hunt down his former mentor, Roland Kane, a war criminal who has escaped custody. This planet is not a standard colony. It is the Lost Land, a world where the laws of evolution have been suspended. The environment is a dense, suffocating jungle where prehistoric predators live alongside high-tech mercenaries. The mission begins with a catastrophic crash. Turok's ship, the Whiskey 24, is shot down by Kane's forces as it enters the atmosphere. This represents the sovereignty of the technological humiliation. The advanced military tech of the 25th century is rendered useless against the sheer hostility of the planet. Turok wakes up in the wreckage, surrounded by the lore of the primeval threat. The jungle is alive with the sound of insects and the low, guttural growls of creatures that should have been extinct for millions of years. This is the sovereignty of the environmental shock. Turok is no longer just a soldier on a hunt. He is prey in an ecosystem designed to kill anything that moves. The lore of the Wolfpack is central to Turok's character. Led by Kane, this group was known for their unconventional and brutal tactics. Turok's history with them is the lore of the Blood Debt. He left the squad after realizing the depth of Kane's depravity, but his current squad mates, led by the suspicious Slade, do not trust him. This creates the sovereignty of the internal friction. Turok is isolated within his own unit, forced to prove his loyalty while navigating a jungle that wants to swallow him whole. The environment is a green hell, where every rustle in the leaves could be a mercenary's knife or a raptor's claw. Turok's primary weapon is the combat knife, which introduces the lore of the primal kill. In the Lost Land, ammunition is scarce and noise attracts predators. The knife represents the sovereignty of the silent executioner. Turok is a master of close-quarter predation, a skill he learned from his ancestors and refined in the Wolfpack. The lore of the raptor takedown is established early on. It is a brutal dance of timing and nerve. Unlike other soldiers, Turok does not fear the dinosaurs. He respects them as fellow hunters. This connection to the ancient sovereignty of the predator is what separates him from the rest of his squad. The Mendel Grumman Corporation is the shadow behind the conflict. This is the sovereignty of the corporate militarism. They funded Kane's research on the planet, believing they could weaponize the local flora and fauna. The lore of the bioweapon potential explains why the planet is so dangerous. It wasn't just nature that created these monsters. It was corporate tampering. The environment is littered with Mendel Grumman research outposts, clinical steel boxes that have been reclaimed by vines and bloodstains. This represents the lore of the failed containment, a recurring theme where human arrogance leads to a biological nightmare. The environment of the lower jungle is a vertical labyrinth. Turok must climb through ancient stone archways and navigate murky swamps. This is the sovereignty of the prehistoric labyrinth. Here, he encounters his first velociraptors. These are not the slow lizards of old cinema. They are the lore of the pack hunter. They use the environment to flank Turok, chirping to one another to coordinate their strikes. This represents the sovereignty of the animal intelligence. Turok's motion tracker is often confused by the swaying trees and the movement of smaller reptiles, creating a constant state of sensory paranoia. Turok finds the remains of a wolf pack scout. The lore of the Kane's influence is evident in the body's modifications. Kane hasn't just been hiding. He has been improving his men with experimental combat drugs. This is the sovereignty of the chemically enhanced soldier. The mercenaries are faster and stronger than standard infantry, making them a match for the dinosaurs. This turns the jungle into a three-way war zone. Turok can often bait the dinosaurs into attacking the mercenaries, a tactic known as the lore of the environmental manipulation. He is a ghost in the brush, letting his enemies destroy each other while he waits in the shadows. The air in the jungle is thick with humidity and the smell of wet earth. Turok finds an ancient compound bow, a weapon that resonates with his heritage. This introduces the lore of the silent sovereignty. The bow is the ultimate tool for a hunter in the Lost Land. With tech arrows and explosive tips, it bridges the gap between the Stone Age and the Space Age. The lore of the patient shot becomes Turok's mantra. He is no longer just a commando. He is the son of stone, reclaiming his identity in a world that mirrors his own internal struggle between civilization and savagery. As the part ends, Turok reaches a high ridge overlooking a massive valley. Below him, he sees the lore of the megafauna. A herd of Brachiosaurus moves through the trees, while pterodactyls circle the peaks. But in the center of the valley is a massive Mendelgrumman terraforming facility. This is the sovereignty of the planetary violation. Kane is using the facility to change the planet's atmosphere, likely to make it more hospitable for a private army. Turok looks at his knife, then at the facility. The Golden Age is a primal world under siege, and Turok is the only predator left to balance the scales. The first roar of a Tyrannosaurus Rex echoes across the valley, vibrating in Turok's chest. The lore of the Apex King has entered the game. Turok knows that to get to Kane, he must cross the territory of the greatest killer the Earth ever produced. He checks his arrows and begins the descent. The hunt is no longer about a mission. It is about survival of the fittest. Turok descends from the ridges into the heart of the valley, a prehistoric basin that serves as the primary hunting ground for the planet's largest inhabitants. The lore here centers on the sovereignty of the megafauna. This is the Lost Land in its truest form, where the scale of life dwarfs human technology. The environment is dominated by massive, tower-sized ferns and ancient cycads, creating the lore of the overwhelming canopy. As Turok moves through the valley floor, he realizes that the Mendelgrumman Corporation has established a series of atmospheric processors to force-evolve the planet's ecosystem. This represents the sovereignty of the genetic acceleration, explaining why the dinosaurs are more aggressive and physically imposing than their fossil records suggest. The primary environmental threat in the valley is Mama, a massive female Tyrannosaurus Rex that has claimed the entire basin as her territory. This introduces the lore of the apex matriarch. Mama is not just a predator. She is a sovereign of the valley. Her presence dictates the movement of every other creature. Turok's first encounter with her is a lesson in sensory sovereignty. The ground shakes with a rhythmic, low-frequency thud long before she is seen. The lore of the vibrational warning is established here. Turok must use the tremors to gauge her distance. Unlike the raptors, Mama cannot be fought with a knife. This is the sovereignty of the absolute power, where the only tactic is evasion and environmental distraction. Turok's path leads him toward the Mendelgrumman Research Outpost 1A, a modular fortress built into a cliffside. The lore of the corporate frontier is on full display. The outpost is protected by automated turrets and patrols of Kane's elite mercenaries. This creates the sovereignty of the controlled corridor. To reach the base, Turok must navigate the Boneyard, a vast clearing filled with the bleached skeletons of long-dead herbivores. This is the lore of the open kill zone. In this environment, there is no cover from above. Pteranodons dive from the sky, while Mama patrols the perimeter. Turok is forced to use smoke grenades and the Mendelgrumman pulse rifle to create temporary windows of safety. The wolf pack mercenaries at the outpost represent the sovereignty of the tactical evolution. They have developed dino leashes, sonic emitters that can repel or attract smaller dinosaurs. This is the lore of the biological enslavement. Turok witnesses the mercenaries using these devices to drive packs of Dilophosaurus toward his position. This turns the environment into a weaponized jungle. The lore of the sonic barrier explains how the humans have survived in Mama's territory. Turok's mission shifts to industrial sabotage. He must destroy the power generators for these emitters, unleashing the local wildlife upon the mercenaries. This is the tactical sovereignty of the Chaos Agent, where Turok uses the planet's rage to clear his path. Inside the outpost, Turok finds the lore of the Kane-Mendel Pact. Logs reveal that Roland Kane isn't just a fugitive. He is a consultant for Mendelgrumman's bioweapons division. He is helping them refine the sovereignty of the Soldiersaur. The company is trying to find a way to implant neural chips into raptors to create the ultimate scout. This represents the lore of the cybernetic desecration. Turok finds a testing pit where a chipped raptor is being forced to navigate a maze. The creature's movements are jerky and unnatural, showing the sovereignty of the broken instinct. Turok puts the creature out of its misery, a moment that defines his moral sovereignty. He kills to survive, but the company kills to control. The environment of the outpost is a mix of high-tech laboratories and damp, earthy cages. This is the lore of the sterile prison. Turok encounters Slade, his squad's heavy weapons specialist, who has been pinned down in the comms tower. Their interaction deepens the sovereignty of the shaky alliance. Slade still views Turok as a traitorous savage, but he cannot deny Turok's effectiveness in the jungle. The lore of the Commander's Clash highlights the friction between Turok's instinctual hunting and the Marines' rigid military doctrine. Turok provides Slade with the OICW, Objective Individual Combat Weapon, a high-tech assault rifle with an integrated grenade launcher. This is the sovereignty of the modern firepower, a tool required for the heavier armored threats within the base. The climax of the Valley Trek occurs at the Great Gate, a massive blast door that separates the research sector from the deep caves. As Turok and Slade attempt to bypass the lock, Mama returns. This is the sovereignty of the scripted terror. The T-Rex smashes through the outpost's reinforced walls as if they were paper. The lore of the armor versus teeth is settled. Human steel is no match for prehistoric muscle. Turok must engage in a boss distraction, using the OICW grenades to target the fuel canisters around the gate. The resulting explosions create a wall of fire that temporarily halts the Queen. This is the lore of the firebreak, a recurring survival tactic in the Turok mythos. The air around the outpost is now thick with the smell of burning jet fuel and scorched scales. Turok finds the lore of the Kane's departure. A holographic message from Kane reveals that he has moved his primary research to the deep tunnels, leaving the outpost to be consumed by the jungle. This represents the sovereignty of the disposable asset. Kane views his own men as expendable decoys. Turok's hatred for his former mentor solidifies. Kane has abandoned the wolf pack's code of the hunter for the cowardice of a corporate puppet. Turok and Slade are left at the edge of the collapsing base, with the roar of the T-Rex echoing behind them. As the part ends, the Great Gate slowly groans open, revealing a dark, steaming tunnel that leads into the planet's crust. This is the sovereignty of the subterranean shift. Turok looks back at the valley, where the sun is setting behind the volcanic peaks. The Golden Age is a world of giants in the dark, and Turok is the only son of stone left to walk the path. He steps into the tunnels, knowing that the environment is about to change from the open chaos of the jungle to the claustrophobic dread of the earth. The smell of sulfur and damp stone replaces the scent of the jungle. Turok checks his bow, the string taut and ready. He knows that in the dark, the dinosaurs are not the only things that hunt. The lore of the underground predators is about to begin. He moves into the shadows, the gate closing behind him with a final, heavy thud. Turok and Slade move deeper into the planet's crust, entering a sprawling network of volcanic fissures known as the sulfur tunnels. The lore here shifts from the lush greenery of the valley to the sovereignty of the toxic underworld. This environment is a series of narrow, winding passages filled with pockets of lethal methane and geothermic steam. This represents the lore of the subterranean hazard, where the environment itself is a slow-acting poison. Turok is forced to move with caution, as his modern armor's filtration systems are strained by the high concentrations of volcanic ash. The air is yellowed and thick, creating the sovereignty of the obscured vision, where shadows on the cave walls often appear more threatening than they actually are. The primary biological threat in these depths is the scorpion. This introduces the lore of the oversized arthropod. These creatures are not dinosaurs, but prehistoric invertebrates that have thrived in the heat of the planet's core. This is the sovereignty of the hive predator. The scorpions are nocturnal and highly sensitive to vibration. Unlike the raptors, they do not chirp or growl. They move with a terrifying, rhythmic clicking of their carapaces. The lore of the venomous ambush is established here. If Turok is stung, his vision blurs and his health drains rapidly, representing the sovereignty of the biological toxins. He must use the combat knife for quick, armor-piercing strikes to their soft underbellies, or the compound bow to pin them to the cavern walls from a distance. As they navigate the Chamber of Steam, Turok finds the remains of the Whiskey 2-4 survivors. This is the lore of the Scattered Squad. He discovers a group of Marines led by Sergeant Grimes, who have fortified a small volcanic shelf. This interaction deepens the sovereignty of the military desperation. These men are low on ammo, exhausted, and losing their minds to the heat. They represent the lore of the Fraying Command. Grimes tells Turok that Kane's mercenaries have been using the tunnels to move special cargo, massive canisters of refined mutagen. This represents the sovereignty of the resource extraction, showing that Kane isn't just hiding. He is fueling a war machine using the planet's natural chemicals. The Wolf Pack mercenaries have established steam harvesters throughout the tunnels. This is the lore of the industrialized hell. The environment is a chaotic mix of natural stone and hissing metal pipes. To progress, Turok must engage in thermal sabotage, disabling the pressure valves to clear the paths. This creates the sovereignty of the scalding hazard. If Turok mistimes his movement, the vents will incinerate him. The lore of the pipe crawl is introduced. Turok must squeeze through narrow service ducts while scorpions skitter just inches above him on the exterior of the pipes. This is the lore of the claustrophobic hunt, where Turok's size becomes a disadvantage and his survival depends on his nerves. Turok discovers the lore of the mutagen pools. In the deeper sections of the tunnels, the water has been replaced by a glowing, viscous liquid. This is the sovereignty of the genetic slurry. Logs found on a dead Mendelgrumman scientist reveal that the company is using this liquid to prime the dinosaur eggs. This explains why the creatures in the Lost Land are larger and more resilient than history suggests. This represents the lore of the artificial selection. The environment around these pools is surreal, with warped, bioluminescent fungi and melting stone formations. Turok realizes that the planet is being turned into a giant petri dish for Kane's bioweapon ambition. This solidifies his sovereignty of the Purge as he begins to destroy the incubation tanks along his path. During a skirmish near a mutagen pool, Turok is reunited with his compound bow's tech arrows. This introduces the sovereignty of the explosive precision. The tech arrow is the lore of the high-tech artifact. It uses a small, impact-triggered warhead that can shatter a scorpion's carapace or collapse a tunnel ceiling. Turok uses these to deal with the mercenary heavy gunners, who are guarding the mutagen transport tracks. This represents the sovereignty of the tactical superiority, where Turok's ancestral weapon becomes more effective than a pulse rifle in the tight, echoing corridors. The flash of the explosion illuminates the cave for a split second, revealing hundreds of glowing eyes in the dark. The climax of the sulfur tunnels occurs at the Magma Bridge, a natural stone arch over a river of molten rock. As Turok and the survivors cross, they are intercepted by Kane's personal guard. This is the sovereignty of the elite commandos. These soldiers use flashbangs and riot shields, turning the narrow bridge into a bottleneck. This is the lore of the tactical siege. Turok must use the frag grenades to knock the shields aside, while Slade provides suppressive fire with his heavy machine gun. The lore of the Bridge of Fire is a test of brotherhood. The Marines must protect each other from the mercenaries in front and the scorpions crawling up from the magma below. The air on the bridge is nearly unbreathable, the heat shimmering and distorting the Marines' vision. Turok finds the lore of the Kane's trap. Just as they reach the other side, Kane detonates charges on the bridge, sending the remaining Whiskey 2-4 survivors into the magma. This represents the sovereignty of the cold execution. Turok and Slade are the only ones left. Kane's voice echoes through the station's intercom, mocking Turok for his loyalty to a dead squad. This fuels the sovereignty of the vengeance. Turok realizes that Kane is no longer a man he can reason with. He is a monster that must be excised from the planet. As the part ends, Turok and Slade reach a massive industrial elevator that leads toward the surface. This is the sovereignty of the upward ascent. Turok looks at the charred remains of the bridge, the weight of his fallen comrades heavy on his heart. The Golden Age is a labyrinth of ash and bone, and Turok is the only survivor left to climb out. He activates the lift, the mechanical grinding of the gears drowning out the clicking of the scorpions. The lift rises toward the light, but the air doesn't get cooler. Turok knows they are heading toward the industrial zone, where Cain has his primary base. The lore of the final stronghold is coming into focus. He checks his remaining tech arrows and sharpens his knife. The hunt has become a war of attrition, and Turok is the only one who knows how to win. Turok and Slade emerge from the elevator into the Mendelgrumman industrial zone, a massive sprawl of heavy machinery and refineries built into the side of a volcanic mountain. The lore here centers on the sovereignty of the industrial desecration. The jungle has been pushed back by miles of concrete and barbed wire, representing the lore of the corporate occupation. The environment is a jagged landscape of cooling towers, conveyor belts, and massive storage tanks filled with refined mutagen. This is the sovereignty of the Gray Desert, where the heat of the planet is harnessed to power Cain's war effort. Turok is no longer in the wild. He is in the heart of the machine, where the lore of the modern soldier must take precedence over the instincts of the hunter. The primary biological threat in this zone is the raptor nest. This introduces the lore of the domesticated pack. Unlike the wild raptors in the valley, these creatures have been raised in the industrial zone, their aggression honed by the constant noise and chemical fumes. This is the sovereignty of the urban predator. The raptors use the pipes and catwalks to flank Turok, their movements coordinated by the dino leashes used by the guards. The lore of the refinery hunt describes a vertical battle where Turok must fight up and down multiple levels of steel grating. He uses his combat knife for the close-quarter sovereignty needed when a raptor leaps from behind a steam pipe, a brutal reminder that the knife is the only weapon that never runs out of ammo. Turok's progress is halted by a wolf pack sniper duel. This introduces the lore of the invisible killer. A high-ranking officer named Logan, Turok's former rival in the wolf pack, has pinned the Marines down from a communications tower. This represents the sovereignty of the long-range predation. Logan uses an experimental plasma sniper rifle, a weapon that leaves no muzzle flash and vaporizes cover. This is the lore of the coward's shot. Turok must use the sovereignty of the stealth approach, moving through the shadows of the cooling towers and using distraction grenades to draw Logan's fire. The lore of the sniper's mind is a mental chess game. Turok knows how Logan thinks because they were trained by the same man. As Turok infiltrates the tower, he finds the lore of the Soldiersaur project. He discovers a laboratory where Mendelgrumman is performing direct neural mapping on live Tyrannosaur embryos. This is the sovereignty of the biomechanical sin. The company is trying to create a pilotable dinosaur, a biological tank that can be controlled via a satellite link. This represents the lore of the ultimate asset. The environment is filled with incubation vats, where the creatures are grown in a bath of mutagen and synthetic growth hormones. Turok realizes that if Cain completes this project, he won't just have an army of men. He will have a legion of monsters that can conquer any world. This solidifies Turok's sovereignty of the saboteur as he plants charges on the lab's power core. The environment of the industrial zone is a constant hazard of mechanical sovereignty. Turok must navigate crusher halls and sorting belts that can grind a man to pulp in seconds. This is the lore of the industrial meat grinder. He uses the compound bow to take out guards from the shadows, the silent sovereignty of the bow being essential in a zone where any loud noise triggers a base-wide lockdown. The lore of the Tech Arrow breach is established when Turok uses an explosive tip to rupture a mutagen tank, flooding a group of mercenaries with the toxic slurry. The resulting chaos allows Turok to bypass a heavily fortified checkpoint. This is the tactical sovereignty of the opportunist, where Turok uses the company's own chemicals to do his work. Turok is reunited with his pulse rifle, but he finds a specialized shotgun attachment. This introduces the lore of the close-range dominance. In the tight corridors of the refinery, the shotgun is the sovereignty of the kinetic force. It can stop a charging raptor in its tracks or shatter a mercenary's riot shield. The lore of the room clearer describes the brutal efficiency needed to survive the wolf pack's breach and clear tactics. Turok and Slade work in tandem, Slade's heavy machine gun providing suppressive fire while Turok uses the shotgun to eliminate the targets that get too close. This represents the sovereignty of the fire team, showing that even Turok is stronger when he has a brother to watch his back. The climax of the industrial zone occurs at the fuel depot, a massive open-air platform surrounded by high-voltage fences. As Turok prepares to detonate the main charges, Logan emerges for a final confrontation. This is the sovereignty of the personal grudge. Logan isn't fighting for Kane. He's fighting to prove he's better than Turok. The lore of the Brotherhood of Blood is explored through their dialogue. Logan represents what Turok could have been, a soulless killer who thrives on the company's paycheck. Turok uses his combat knife to end the duel in a flurry of sparks and steel. This is the lore of the final verdict, where the warrior's spirit triumphs over the mercenary's greed. The lore of the chain reaction begins as the fuel depot catches fire. The environment becomes an inferno of exploding canisters and collapsing steel. This is the sovereignty of the pyre. Turok and Slade must race toward the extraction zone while the base disintegrates around them. The lore of the Fire Run describes the sheer desperation of the escape, with raptors fleeing the flames and mercenaries abandoning their posts. This represents the sovereignty of the survival instinct, which levels the playing field for every living thing on the planet. Turok looks back and sees the Chronosaur lab engulfed in a massive fireball. The project is dead, but the man who started it is still out there. As the part ends, Turok and Slade reach the edge of the industrial zone, looking out over the volcanic plains that lead toward Kane's private fortress. The air is black with soot and the smell of burning rubber. The Golden Age is a factory of death in ruins, and Turok is the only saboteur left to watch it burn. He checks his remaining arrows, his face blackened by smoke. The hunt has moved past the dinosaurs and the mercenaries. It is now a direct path to the heart of the wolf pack. The heat of the volcano shimmers in the distance, a reminder of the planet's raw power. Turok knows that Kane is waiting for him in the fire spire. The lore of the final stronghold has reached its peak. He begins the long trek across the plains, the sound of the exploding refinery fading behind him. Turok and Slade move out of the burning industrial ruins and onto the volcanic plains, a barren, ash-choked expanse that stretches toward the base of Kane's primary mountain stronghold. The lore here centers on the sovereignty of the desolate frontier. The environment is a hellish landscape of cooling lava flows, jagged obsidian glass, and thick clouds of falling soot that block out the sun. This represents the lore of the Ash World, where the lush jungle of the valley is a distant memory. This environment is a no-man's land, where neither the company nor the dinosaurs have full control. The air is dry and metallic, forcing Turok to rely on his sovereignty of the primal endurance as he navigates the unstable ground. The primary biological threat of the plains is the Giganotosaurus. This introduces the lore of the rival king. While Mama, the T-Rex, rules the jungle, the Giganotosaurus is the sovereignty of the wasteland. It is larger, faster, and more aggressive than the Tyrannosaur, acting as a living seismic event. The lore suggests that this creature was drawn to the plains by the heat of the Mendelgrumman refineries. This is the sovereignty of the territorial predator. Turok's encounter with this beast is defined by the lore of the seismic shadow. Because the ash cloud limits visibility to a few meters, Turok can only track the monster by the vibration of the obsidian under his feet. This creates a state of auditory paranoia, where every crack of the cooling lava sounds like a closing jaw. Beneath the layers of ash, Turok discovers the ancient ruins. This is the lore of the lost civilization. These are stone structures that predate both the company and the modern Lost Land ecosystem. The environment is filled with great totems and stone altars carved with the likeness of dinosaurs. This represents the sovereignty of the ancestral connection. The lore reveals that an ancient tribe once lived here, worshipping the dinosaurs as gods. This discovery resonates with Turok's own heritage, shifting his perspective from a soldier to a guardian of the stone. He finds a sacrificial dagger made of black obsidian, a weapon that possesses the sovereignty of the ritual sharpness. It is the lore of the blood metal, a blade that never dulls and can pierce the thickest dinosaur hide. The wolf pack heavy infantry has established thermal outposts within the ruins. These soldiers are the lore of the juggernauts. They wear exoskeletal armor that allows them to carry Gatling cannons and flamethrowers. This is the sovereignty of the mechanized brute. The environment of the ruins becomes a battlefield of stone versus steel. Turok must use the sovereignty of the high ground, climbing the ancient totems to rain down tech arrows on the armored mercenaries. The lore of the totem snipe describes how Turok uses his ancestral surroundings to defeat superior modern technology. He isn't just fighting a war. He is reclaiming a holy site from corporate defilers. Turok finds the lore of the Cain ancestor connection. In a hidden chamber beneath the central altar, he finds logs left by Roland Cain. It turns out Cain didn't choose this planet by accident. He was obsessed with the warrior lore of Turok's ancestors. This represents the sovereignty of the twisted obsession. Cain believes that by conquering the lost land, he is proving himself superior to the ancient kings. This turns the conflict into a philosophical sovereignty. Cain wants to be a god of the new world, while Turok wants to be the protector of the old. The environment of the Chamber of Records is a quiet, dusty space where the weight of history settles on Turok's shoulders. He realizes that killing Cain is no longer just a mission, it is a spiritual requirement. The environment of the plains features lava rivers that act as natural barriers. This is the sovereignty of the molten boundary. Turok must use the lore of the obsidian path, leaping across floating slabs of rock while the Giganotosaurus stalks the banks. This is the tactical sovereignty of the acrobat. If he falls, the heat will melt his armor in seconds. The lore of the heat blur describes how the shimmering air makes it difficult to aim his compound bow. Turok must rely on his inner sight, a skill passed down through the lore of the Turok lineage, to hit the mercenaries guarding the far bank. This is a moment of pure instinct, where the soldier and the hunter finally merge into one. Turok is reunited with a Mendel Grumman minigun. This introduces the sovereignty of the overwhelming ordnance. In the open plains, the silent sovereignty of the bow is often not enough. The minigun is the lore of the lead storm, capable of shredding a pack of raptors or stopping a charging Giganotosaurus. This represents the sovereignty of the industrial might. However, the weapon is heavy and slows Turok down, making him an easy target for the mercenary sniper fire. Turok must choose between mobility and power, a recurring theme in the lore of the modern warrior. He uses the minigun to hold a defensive stand at the entrance to the mountain pass, creating a pile of spent casings that rivals the piles of ash. The climax of the plains occurs at the Obsidian Gate, the final entrance to Cain's mountain base. As Turok and Slade prepare to breach, the Giganotosaurus makes its final charge. This is the sovereignty of the ancient wrath. The creature smashes through the stone pillars of the ruins, its roar drowning out the sound of the volcanic eruptions. This is the lore of the final gatekeeper. Turok cannot kill it with bullets. He must use the sovereignty of the environment. He targets the geothermic caps on the refinery pipes running through the gate. The resulting explosion of superheated steam blinds the beast, allowing the Marines to slip through the gate just as it slams shut. The air inside the mountain pass is cooler, but it carries the scent of chemical processing. Turok find the lore of the Cain's final preparation. The wolf pack is no longer retreating. They are fortifying. This represents the sovereignty of the last stand. The environment shifts from the ash-covered ruins to the high-tech fortress, built into the volcanic core. Turok looks at Slade, both of them covered in soot and blood. The Golden Age is a world of fire and buried gods, and Turok is the only son of stone left to settle the score. He sharpens his obsidian knife, ready for the final ascent into the dragon's throat. As the part ends, the sound of the volcano's rumble is replaced by the hum of plasma generators. Turok knows he is close. The lore of the heart of the pack is the final destination. He steps into the elevators, leaving the prehistoric plains behind for a final encounter with the man who taught him how to kill. Turok and Slade enter the mountain fortress, the absolute nerve center of Cain's operations. The lore here transitions from the prehistoric wild to the sovereignty of the high-tech citadel. This is a vertical labyrinth carved directly into the basalt heart of the volcano, representing the lore of the modern conqueror. The environment is characterized by cold, brushed steel corridors, pulsating blue plasma conduits, and the hum of massive server banks. This is the sovereignty of the sterile death, a place where nature has been completely erased in favor of military efficiency. Turok is no longer navigating by the stars or the scent of the jungle. He is moving through a digital fortress where the lore of the electronic eye tracks his every heartbeat. The primary human threat in this sector is the Kane elite synthetics. This introduces the lore of the Hollow Soldier. These are not men, but high-end combat androids built by Mendel Grumman to supplement the wolf pack's dwindling numbers. This represents the sovereignty of the disposable infantry. These synthetics do not feel fear, nor do they bleed. The lore of the cold circuitry explains that they are programmed with the combat data of every member of the wolf pack, including Turok himself. This creates a state of mirror combat, where the enemies anticipate Turok's tactical maneuvers before he executes them. He is forced to abandon his traditional training and rely on the sovereignty of the unpredictable instinct, using his combat knife to short-circuit their neural processors in brutal close-quarters grappling. In the lower levels of the fortress, Turok discovers the Planet Killer device. This is the lore of the terraforming terror. The device is a massive atmospheric destabilizer that Kane intends to use as a bargaining chip with the galactic powers. This represents the sovereignty of the ultimate leverage. The lore reveals that Kane doesn't just want to hide on this planet. He wants to use its unique geothermic energy to power a weapon capable of stripping the atmosphere from any colony world. The environment around the device is a sovereignty of the radioactive hazard, where the air is ionized and blue sparks dance across the metal railings. Turok realizes the scale of the corporate betrayal. Mendel Grumman wasn't just researching dinosaurs. They were building a god complex in the form of a machine. The environment of the fortress interior is a masterpiece of vertical sovereignty. Turok must navigate grav lifts and magnetic rail platforms that span massive internal chasms. This is the lore of the industrial abyss. He uses his compound bow to take out plasma sentries from across the void, the sovereignty of the silent shot being the only way to progress without alerting the entire garrison. The lore of the ghost in the steel describes how Turok uses the maintenance shafts to bypass heavily fortified choke points. This represents the tactical sovereignty of the infiltrator, where his knowledge of wolf pack stealth allows him to turn Kane's own security protocols against him. Turok is reunited with his Mendel Grumman pulse rifle, but it has been upgraded with a plasma burst module. This introduces the sovereignty of the energy war. In a fortress of steel and synthetics, traditional ballistics are less effective. The plasma burst is the lore of the shield breaker, capable of overloading the personal energy shields of Kane's elite guards. This represents the sovereignty of the technological parity. Turok and Slade engage in hallway warfare, where the environment is a spray of blue sparks and molten metal. The lore of the corridor grind is a test of endurance. They must push through endless waves of synthetics to reach the command deck. Slade's heavy weaponry provides the brute sovereignty, while Turok provides the precision strike. Inside the security archives, Turok finds the lore of the wolf pack's origin. He watches digital logs of Kane's early years, showing how he was once a decorated war hero before the wolf took over his soul. This is the sovereignty of the moral decay. The lore suggests that Kane believes he is saving Turok by teaching him the truth of the world, that only the predator deserves to live. This represents the lore of the twisted mentor. Turok finds his own military file, marked with a red traitor stamp. This fuels his sovereignty of the justified rage. He isn't just a soldier anymore. He is the verdict for every crime Kane has committed in the name of the wolf pack. The climax of the fortress infiltration occurs at the central core, a massive spherical chamber where the Planet Killer is being fueled. As Turok prepares to plant the final charges, he is intercepted by Kane's personal guard captain, a man who has replaced half of his body with cybernetics. This is the sovereignty of the biomechanical hybrid. The duel takes place on a narrow bridge over the reactor core. This is the lore of the high-stakes duel. The captain uses a power sword that can cut through Turok's bowstring, forcing Turok to rely entirely on his sovereignty of the blade. The lore of the steel versus spirit is settled when Turok uses the captain's own cybernetic weight to pull him over the edge and into the core. The lore of the system collapse begins as the charges detonate. The environment becomes a nightmare of failing gravity and exploding plasma lines. This is the sovereignty of the shattered machine. Turok and Slade must navigate a zero-G corridor, where the floor and ceiling have become irrelevant. This represents the sovereignty of the spatial disorientation. The lore of the weightless escape describes the sheer chaos of the fortress falling apart around them. Turok uses his grappling hook to swing between the falling debris, a final demonstration of his sovereignty of the hunter's agility. He looks back and sees the planet-killer device engulfed in a massive electrical storm. The weapon is gone, but the man who built it has already retreated to the summit. As the part ends, Turok and Slade reach the surface platform at the very peak of the mountain. The air is cold and thin, and the clouds of the lost land are below them. The Golden Age is a citadel of steel in ruins, and Turok is the only son of stone left to finish the hunt. He looks up and sees Kane waiting in a customized Black Ops dropship, ready for a final escape. The lore of the final flight is the only thing standing between Turok and his vengeance. He checks his last tech arrow, his hand steady despite the tremors of the erupting volcano beneath him. The sky is a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars are beginning to show. Turok knows the hunt is almost over. The lore of the summit showdown has begun. He steps onto the landing pad, the wind howling through the struts of the fortress. Turok and Slade sprint across the crumbling summit platform as Kane's customized Black Ops dropship roars into the sky. The lore here transitions to the sovereignty of the aerial pursuit. The mountain fortress is disintegrating beneath them, its internal reactors turning the peak into a volcanic torch. This represents the lore of the falling giant. Turok and Slade hijack a secondary wolf pack interceptor, a high-speed VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing craft, to begin a desperate chase through the mountain peaks. The environment is no longer the solid ground of the jungle or the steel of the base. It is the sovereignty of the infinite abyss, where the thin mountain air and jagged obsidian spires are the only landmarks in a world of clouds and fire. The primary environmental threat during the chase is the pterosaur swarm. This introduces the lore of the sky predator. The noise and heat of the dropships have agitated thousands of pteranodons and quetzalcoatlus, the massive kings of the air. This is the sovereignty of the avian fury. The creatures don't just fly. They attack the ships with a suicidal intensity, their leathery wings buffeting the cockpit glass. The lore of the winged wall describes a chaotic dogfight where Turok must man the interceptor's chain gun to clear a path through the biological debris. This represents the sovereignty of the survival reflex, where the pilot must dodge both the enemy's plasma fire and the literal bodies of prehistoric monsters. The aerial duel with Kane is a masterclass in high-altitude sovereignty. Kane's ship is equipped with active camouflage and heat-seeking missiles, representing the lore of the invisible hunter. Turok must use the sovereignty of the instinctual piloting, flying through the narrow volcanic vents to lose the missile locks. The lore of the smoke trail hunt explains that Turok isn't just trying to shoot Kane down. He's trying to force him to land. The environment is a blur of gray ash and orange lava, creating the sovereignty of the visual distortion. Turok uses the tech pulse from his ship scanners to track the shimmer of Kane's cloaked vessel. This is a game of technological chess played at Mach 2. The chase leads them over the Raptor Graveyard, a massive, desolate plateau on the far side of the mountain. This is the lore of the final rest. The ground is white with the bleached bones of generations of predators who came here to die. This represents the sovereignty of the Paleolithic tomb. Turok manages to clip the engine of Kane's ship with a well-placed burst of fire, but his own interceptor is struck by a plasma charge. Both ships plummet toward the bone-strewn earth. The lore of the controlled crash describes the terrifying descent where Turok must fight the controls to ensure they hit the softest part of the bone drifts. This is the sovereignty of the impact, a moment where the space-age technology finally fails, returning both hunters to the dust. Turok crawls from the wreckage of the interceptor into the graveyard environment. The air is silent, save for the whistling of the wind through the ribcages of long-dead giants. This is the lore of the Bone Garden. The environment is a monochrome landscape of white bone and gray ash. This represents the sovereignty of the primal silence. The lore suggests that the graveyard is a neutral zone where even the fiercest predators rarely hunt. However, the crash has disturbed the bone scavengers, small, fast-moving reptiles that live inside the skulls of the larger dinosaurs. This is the sovereignty of the micropredator. Turok must use his combat knife to fend off these pests while he searches for Slade in the debris. The wolf pack survivors from Kane's ship are already establishing a perimeter among the skeletons. This is the lore of the desperate guard. These are the broken wolves, men who know they are stuck on a dead planet with a dying leader. This represents the sovereignty of the cornered animal. The environment of the graveyard provides macabre cover. Turok uses a massive brachiosaurus skull as a sniper nest. This is the lore of the bone shield. He uses his compound bow to pick off the guards one by one. The silent sovereignty of the bow is amplified by the echoes of the graveyard. The mercenaries can't tell if the whistle they hear is the wind or a tech arrow. Turok finds Slade, who is pinned under the interceptor's wing. The lore of the Brotherhood's end is poignant here. Slade is badly wounded, but he hands Turok his custom magnum, a high-caliber sidearm known as the sovereignty of the final word. The lore of the Iron Hand describes this weapon as a hand cannon capable of stopping a charging bull raptor. This represents the sovereignty of the tactical gift. Slade tells Turok to finish the mission alone. This is the lore of the lone hunter. Turok leaves Slade with a medkit and a flare, stepping into the mist of the graveyard to find Kane. He is no longer part of a squad. He is the sovereignty of the solo predator. In the center of the graveyard, Turok finds the lore of the ancient burial. He discovers a massive stone monolith carved by the same civilization that built the ruins in Part 5. This is the sovereignty of the Stone Sentinel. The monolith depicts a warrior holding a knife over a fallen king. The lore suggests that Turok's arrival here was foretold by the ancient blood. This represents the sovereignty of the destiny. The environment around the monolith is charged with a strange, static energy that makes the hair on Turok's neck stand up. He finds a tech bow string on the altar, an upgrade that increases his sovereignty of the draw strength. He is being armed by the ghosts of the planet for the final kill. The lore of the Kane's descent is visible as Turok tracks him through the Bone Garden. Kane has been wounded, leaving a trail of synthetic blood mixed with human red. This represents the sovereignty of the failing monster. Kane is retreating toward a small, hidden emergency beacon at the edge of the plateau. The environment becomes more treacherous as the graveyard gives way to the sinkholes, areas where the bone crust is thin and masks deep pits of tar. This is the lore of the Black Grip. Turok must use his sovereignty of the tracking, following the broken bones and the scent of ozone. He is the wolf hunting the man. As the part ends, Turok reaches the edge of a massive pit. At the bottom, Kane is struggling to activate the beacon, surrounded by the shadows of 1,000 years of death. The Golden Age is a valley of ghosts and ash, and Turok is the only son of stone left to deliver the verdict. He notches a tech arrow, the glow of the tip reflecting in his eyes. The hunt has reached its final destination. Turok descends into the heart of the Sinkhole Basin, a natural amphitheater of tar and bone at the edge of the raptor graveyard. The lore here reaches its peak with the sovereignty of the final reckoning. This is the ultimate confrontation between the student and the master. The environment is a treacherous circle of bubbling black bitumen and colossal ribs that curve over the arena like the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral. This represents the lore of the tar pit, a place where the planet's history is preserved in a sticky, lethal embrace. Roland Kane stands in the center, his uniform shredded, his face a mask of scarred pride. He represents the sovereignty of the fallen commander, a man who has lost his army but refuses to lose his status as the alpha. The battle begins not with guns, but with the lore of the knife duel. Kane discards his pulse rifle, challenging Turok to settle their debt through the wolf pack code. This is the sovereignty of the primal challenge. The duel is a high-stakes exchange of blocks, parries, and counters. Turok's combat knife clashes against Kane's specialized, serrated machete, creating sparks that illuminate the dark basin. This represents the lore of the lethal heritage. Every movement is a reflection of the years they spent together in the shadows. They know each other's rhythms perfectly. The environment is a hazard in itself, as the heat from the nearby volcano causes the tar to erupt in geysers, forcing the combatants to constantly shift their footing. As the duel intensifies, the sovereignty of the apex predator reasserts itself. The ground begins to heave, and with a roar that shatters the silence of the graveyard, Mama, the T-Rex, bursts through the bone crust. This is the lore of the unfinished business. The queen has tracked Turok from the valley, her body scarred by the explosions at the outpost. This turns the duel into a three-way survival struggle. The environment is no longer just a ring. It is a buffet for a starving giant. This represents the sovereignty of the natural order, reminding both men that their petty human war is insignificant compared to the hunger of a prehistoric god. Turok must use the sovereignty of the agility, weaving between Mama's massive legs to lure her into Kane's path. The tactical sovereignty of the three-way war requires Turok to manage his resources with absolute precision. He uses the compound bow to fire tech arrows into the soft tissue of the T-Rex's throat while simultaneously parrying Kane's desperate lunges. This is the lore of the multitasking hunter. The environment of the basin is destroyed as Mama sweeps her tail through the fossilized remains, sending bone shards flying like shrapnel. This represents the sovereignty of the chaos element. Turok realizes he can use the tar pits to his advantage. He maneuvers toward the edge of a bubbling pool, baiting Kane into a charge. The lore of the Black Grave is realized when Kane loses his balance, his legs sinking into the viscous trap. With Kane temporarily pinned by the tar, the focus shifts to the final T-Rex takedown. This is the sovereignty of the Dragon Slayer. Turok realizes that standard weapons will never be enough to put the queen down for good. He must use the lore of the high-altitude kill. He climbs the massive ribcage of an ancient Brachiosaurus, leaping onto Mama's head as she lunges for him. This represents the sovereignty of the total commitment. In a cinematic feat of primal bravery, Turok uses his combat knife to strike at the cranial soft spot, located just behind the eye. This is the lore of the death blow, a legendary maneuver whispered about in the Turok bloodline. The queen lets out a final, earth-shaking groan before collapsing into the bone dust. The lore of the fallen queen leaves a heavy silence in the basin. Turok stands atop the carcass, his chest heaving, his body covered in a mix of ash, oil, and blood. He descends to face the trapped Kane. This is the sovereignty of the executioner. Kane, half submerged in the tar, looks at Turok with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. This is the lore of the predatory end. He tells Turok that by killing him, Turok is finally becoming the wolf he was always meant to be. This represents the sovereignty of the final lesson. Turok rejects the philosophy, stating that he kills for the planet and his brothers, not for the joy of the hunt. He delivers the final strike, ending the reign of the wolf pack. The environment of the sinkhole basin begins to flood with lava as the volcano finally reaches its breaking point. This is the sovereignty of the Earth's purge. The lore of the reset button is the planet's way of erasing the corporate stain. Turok retrieves his compound bow and searches for the emergency beacon. He finds it, but it has been damaged in the fight. This introduces the lore of the last transmission. Turok must use his technical knowledge to bypass the burnt circuits, sending a coded pulse to the orbiting Whiskey 24 debris field, hoping for a response from any surviving rescue craft. This represents the sovereignty of the faint hope. During the wait, Turok revisits the lore of the ancestral altar within his mind. He feels the sovereignty of the lost land, acknowledging his victory. He has cleared the cancer of Mendelgrumman and balanced the scales of the prehistoric world. This represents the sovereignty of the protector. The environment around him is a literal hellscape of fire and shadow, but Turok stands calm in the center of it. He is no longer a soldier on a mission. He is the son of stone, the bridge between the ancient past and the uncertain future. The Golden Age is a world of fire and bone, and Turok has survived the trial by fire. As the part ends, a faint light appears in the ash-choked sky. It is not a star, but the landing lights of a Mendel Grumman retrieval shuttle that has been hijacked by the surviving Marines. The lore of the extraction under fire begins. Turok grabs the unconscious Slade from the wreck and moves toward the clearing. The Golden Age is a fugitive's escape, and Turok is the only pilot left to steer through the storm. He watches the raptor graveyard disappear beneath the smoke as the shuttle gains altitude. The hunt for Kane is over, but the war for the planet's secrets is just beginning. The sky turns from bruised purple to a deep, cosmic black as the shuttle breaks orbit. Turok looks down at the lost land one last time. The lore of the hidden world remains intact. Despite the destruction, the planet is too vast and too wild to be fully tamed. The sovereignty of the dinosaur will continue in the shadows. Turok closes his eyes, his hands still gripped tightly around the hilt of his knife. The shuttle breaks through the upper atmosphere of the lost land, leaving the volcanic firestorms and the screams of prehistoric giants behind. The lore of the final extraction centers on the sovereignty of the sole witnesses. Joseph Turok and a battered Slade are all that remain of the original mission. As they drift into the silent vacuum of space, the environment shifts from the suffocating humidity of the jungle to the sovereignty of the sterile void. Looking back at the planet, Turok sees the glowing orange scars of the erupting volcanoes. This represents the lore of the planetary reset, a belief that the world itself fought back against the corporate intrusion, using Turok as its primary instrument of justice. The fate of the Mendel Grumman Corporation is a tale of strategic retreat. With the destruction of the mountain fortress and the loss of the planet killer device, the company initiates a total blackout protocol. The lore of the corporate erasure reveals that the lost land was officially struck from all navigational charts. This represents the sovereignty of the hidden scandal. The company portrays the disappearance of the Whiskey 24 as a routine deep space tragedy, ensuring that no one ever returns to the planet to find the remains of the Chronosaur project. This leaves the environment of the lost land in a state of perpetual isolation, a prehistoric time capsule guarded by the ghosts of the wolf pack. For Joseph Turok, the conclusion of the hunt brings no true peace, but rather the sovereignty of the eternal exile. He is a man who knows too much. The lore of the Ghost Soldier describes his life after the crash as a series of shadow ops on the fringes of colonized space. He refuses to return to the military structure that produced Kane. This represents the lore of the independent warrior. Turok becomes a legendary figure in the Outer Rim, a mercenary with a code who specializes in high-risk environmental survival. The environment of his life becomes one of nomadic sovereignty, moving from world to world, always keeping his combat knife and compound bow close. He has become the protector of the wild in a galaxy increasingly dominated by cold machines. The legacy of the wolf pack is one of infection and caution. While Kane is dead, the wolf philosophy, the idea of the soldier as the ultimate apex predator, persists in the darker corners of the military. This is the sovereignty of the predatory ideology. The lore of the wolf pack descendants suggests that secret factions within the United Americas military continue to study Kane's journals. This creates a state of ideological war, where Turok's Son of Stone philosophy of respect for nature stands in direct opposition to the wolf philosophy of domination. The environment of the future is a sovereignty of choice, where every soldier must decide if they are a hunter of monsters or a monster themselves. The lore of the lost land itself remains the greatest mystery. Despite the fire, the genetic mutagens released by the refineries have permanently altered the planet's evolution. This is the sovereignty of the unintended consequence. The dinosaurs that survived are now faster, smarter, and more resilient. The lore of the super predator suggests that if a second expedition ever reaches the planet, they will find a world that has fully adapted to human warfare. The environment is now a sovereignty of the evolved hive, where the raptors have learned to scavenge human technology. This ensures the lore of the Turok mythos can never truly die. The planet is a ticking biological clock waiting for a new Son of Stone to emerge. Turok's relationship with Slade becomes a cornerstone of the sovereignty of the veteran. Though they started as enemies, their shared trauma creates the lore of the blood bond. Slade becomes Turok's voice in the world, using his connections to keep the company's assassins off Turok's trail. This represents the sovereignty of the Shadow Support. Together, they form a silent bureau, a group dedicated to preventing the weaponization of alien life forms. The environment of their alliance is one of subterranean resistance, fighting a war that the public never sees. This adds a layer of conspiratorial sovereignty to the Turok legacy, turning the prehistoric hunter into a modern-day sentinel. The lore of the ancient totems discovered in Part 5 suggests that Turok was not the first of his kind to find the Lost Land, and he won't be the last. This is the sovereignty of the cyclical hero. The Turok name is revealed to be a title, not just a surname, the Protector of the Gates. This represents the lore of the multiversal warrior. The environment of the Turok story is a sovereignty of the Nexus, where different eras and different versions of the hero all fight to keep the balance between man and beast. This 2008 chapter is seen as the Age of the Commando, a transition where the ancient warrior had to learn to use the pulse rifle to save his soul. The final summary of the Turok legacy is the lore of the eternal balance. The Golden Age is a struggle for the natural soul, and the sovereignty of the hunter is the final law. The story proves that no matter how much technology advances, the basic rules of the predator and the prey remain unchanged. This is the sovereignty of the primal truth. Turok's journey from a traitor to a savior is the lore of the redemptive path. He taught the galaxy that the greatest weapon isn't a planet-killer device or a cybernetic T-Rex. It is the sovereignty of a man with a knife who knows what he is fighting for. As the shuttle enters the slipstream, Turok looks at the small obsidian dagger he recovered from the ruins. The lore of the Son of Stone is secure. The planet below may be lost to the maps, but its spirit lives on in the man who conquered it. The Golden Age is a story carved in bone, and Turok is the only historian left to carry the weight. The screen fades to black with the low, distant rumble of a T-Rex's roar, a reminder that in the Lost Land, the Queen never truly dies. She just waits for the next intruder.